You're tuned into the Spot Up Pod, the official podcast of the Spot Up Shot newsletter. I'm your host, Paul Garcia. In today's episode, Jeremy Sochan will miss Eurobasket due to injury, breaking down De'Aaron Fox's contract extension with the Spurs, going through some free agent signings including Riley Minix, Harrison Ingram, Micah Potter, and Adam Flagler. Finally, some news and notes on the Spurs' upcoming schedule release. Well, this is supposed to be the off-season time for the Spurs, so it's supposed to be a slow news cycle. However, there's been a lot of news going on within the past week for San Antonio, so we have a lot of topics to go through here on this episode of the Spot Up Pod. So let's begin first with the news that came out on Sunday morning, which was the news that Jeremy Sochan will miss Eurobasket with Poland due to injury. So let's talk about that. So according to Sportando and other multiple European outlets, Sochan will not play in Eurobasket with Poland due to a calf injury. He'll instead return to San Antonio to begin rehabbing the injury. It's not a significant injury, but he wasn't going to be able to recover within enough time to play in Eurobasket, which does start on August 27th and ends in mid-September. So that was just too short of a window for Sochan to get back onto the court with Poland. So he will miss Eurobasket. However, since it's not a significant injury, he should have time to be prepared. And he said, according to Sportando, that he is going to be ready for training camp. He's expected to be ready for training camp with the Spurs. So Sochan will be playing in Eurobasket this upcoming season or this upcoming summer, but he should be ready to go for opening night of the regular season. If Sochan was the only Spurs player projected to play in any kind of international competition this summer, I am waiting to see if David Jones-Garcia plays with the Dominican Republic. Dominican Republic has not officially announced their roster yet for the 2025 AmeriCup, and those games are only going to take place from August 22nd through August 25th. So again, if Jones-Garcia doesn't play with the Dominican Republic, then no Spurs players will be playing in any kind of international competitions this summer. And instead, we'll see the Spurs players in their first games during the preseason. So that's just the early wrap up on the news that Sochan will be out due to a calf injury for Eurobasket. But again, it's not a significant injury, so he should be ready to go for the regular season. All right, so now for our second topic, let's go back to Monday. The Spurs signed De'Aaron Fox officially to a veteran contract extension. The deal was reported as $229 million for 4 years. The key takeaway, though, is that Fox is going to earn 30% of the projected salary cap for next season, 26-27. So the initial reports that came out from Shams Charania and others were that it would be $229 for 4 years. It really depends on the rise in the cap next summer. So if the cap rises 10%, then yes, Fox will get that $229 million for 4 years. So that looks like in year one of the extension, $51 million, year two, $55 million, year three, $59 million, and then year four, $63 million, which totals up to $229 million by the age of 31 for Fox. However, if the cap doesn't rise up to 10% and instead it's a little bit lower, as initially reported by Bobby Marks at 7%, well then the amount of the deal will be a little bit less, about $7 million left. So it'll be $222 million for 4 years. Again, it all depends on that rise in the cap. If it's 7%, it's going to be a lower amount. If it's 10%, it's a higher amount. Let's just go through the projections in case it is 7%. So if the cap only rises by 7%, Fox will earn $49.6 million in year one, $53.6 million in year two, $57.5 million in year three, and then $61.5 million in year four, which will total up to $22 million. So, again, it all just comes down to the rise in the cap next year, and we should expect those numbers. They usually come out in the final day of the offseason for next summer, which is June 30th, 2026, is when we should get the actual amounts for Fox's new extension when those numbers come in. So I also wrote about Fox's extension this past week over on the spotupshot.com if you want to check out that piece. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some quick takeaways from that piece where I basically went through a simulation of each of the Spurs' off seasons. Now, I do want to note it's tough to do this exercise just because we don't know which free agents the Spurs are going to be signing in the future, or if they're going to make any trades, et cetera, or sign any other players to extensions. So that's why this is a little bit tougher, but I just want to go with who's on the roster right now and look at the projections. So regarding this current offseason that we're in, 25-26, there is still a deal that might need to be completed for the Spurs, and that is to see if whether or not they agree to a contract extension, a rookie extension with Jeremy Sochan. If the Spurs and Sochan agree to an extension, well, then Sochan's new numbers would be on the books for the next couple of years, however long the length of that extension would be. The Spurs and Sochan have up until the day before opening night of the regular season, so about October 20, maybe October 21st is what we'll say here, to agree and sign an extension. If not, then he will be a restricted free agent in 2026. Now, because I don't know right now if Sochan and the Spurs will agree on an extension, I'm going to go through this exercise under the impression that he doesn't sign an extension with the Spurs this current offseason. So let's first go to next summer, which is year one of Fox's extension, 26-27. Off-season. Here's a picture of the Spurs' off-season picture. So multiple players will be going into unrestricted free agency. That'll be Harrison Barnes, Kelly Olynyk, Jordan McLaughlin, and Lindy Waters III. The Spurs will also have 4 players going into restricted free agency. Again, Jeremy Sochan, David Jones-Garcia, Riley Minix, and Harrison Ingram, who are all currently on 2-way contracts. The incoming players the Spurs will be either their 2026 first-round pick, or they have the ability to swap with the Atlanta Hawks for their 2026 first-round pick. Right now, I'm projecting the Spurs keep their own 2026 first-round pick because the Hawks, because they're in an Eastern Conference where they should have a better record overall than the Spurs. It would be better for the Spurs to keep their own pick. And then the free agency resources the Spurs are going to have next summer are likely going to be as an over-the-cap team, which means they'd have access to the non-tax mid-level exception, which is $15 million projected for next season, and the biannual exception, which is $5.4 million projected for next season. So basically, a quick overall takeaway for next summer with year one of Fox's extension is that they should be an over-the-cap team, the Spurs, but they should still be far enough under the tax and under the first apron that they can make some trades. They can use their free agent exceptions. Basically, they have a lot of flexibility financially where they're not really constrained even with Fox on a max extension in year one. Now let's go to year 2 of Fox's extension, which would be the summer of 27-28. Some players coming off the books with their contracts would be Keldon Johnson and Julian Champagnie, both going into unrestricted free agency. Also, though, a player who would potentially sign an extension the season before would be Victor Wembanyama. So now his extension will be kicking in that summer of 27-28. As far as incoming players, the Spurs would get the Atlanta Hawks' 2027 first-round pick that summer. And then as far as free agency resources, again, the Spurs, even with Wemby on a max at either 25% of the cap or 30% of the cap, they're still going to be an over-the-cap team, but enough flexibility financially under the luxury tax and under the first apron hard cap that they can still use their exceptions, such as the non-tax MLE of $15.8 million to sign free agents or trade for players, and the biannual exception that summer of $5.7 million. And regarding Wemby's extension number, again, it's going to come down to he's going to a normal rookie extension for him would be 25% of the cap, but if he makes some of the end of year awards criteria within 25-26 this upcoming season, and then 26-27 within the next 2 years, like maybe Defensive Player of the Year, some All-NBA teams, those kind of awards, then he has a chance to get 30% of the cap. And so that, again, that's where I'm kind of projecting him to be, is at 30% of the cap. But still, even with Fox and Wemby on extensions, max extensions at summer of 27-28, the Spurs are still okay financially. There's not really, a lot of limitations for them where they can still make some trades, use their exceptions to sign free agents as well. Now let's go to 28-29. This is year 3 now of Fox's extension. So now the interesting question is, what extension did Stephon Castle sign with the Spurs? So the season before, Castle would have been eligible to sign an extension with the Spurs, a rookie extension. And so, his extension would kick in this summer of 28-29. As far as incoming players, the Spurs have 2 choices here. They can either keep their own 2028 first round pick, or they could swap with the Boston Celtics for their first round pick. Again, it kind of depends, who's projected to have a worse record that season of 28-29. So we'll see what pick the Spurs would get. And then now with Castle now getting an extension, the Spurs are probably going to be over the first apron, which means they would probably get partial access to the taxpayer mid-level exception, which is projected to be $6.6 million that summer. So really the big takeaway is, what is Castle's number that summer? Does he really excel in his first 4 years in the NBA, where now, yes, he's going to need a max rookie extension, which is 25% of the cap or $45 million, or, does he have an okay start to his first 4 years in the league, and maybe he's not a max player yet, so maybe they can sign him for like $10 million less, like $35 million that summer. So if he gets that full $45 million, the 25% of the cap amount, then yes, the Spurs are going to be over the first apron with Castle, with Wemby, with Fox, all on extensions, which gives them, again, just partial access to the taxpayer MLE. And again, there's some limitations they can have financially when that happens, when they're already over the first apron. However, if Castle doesn't get the full max, he gets maybe like $35 million that summer kicking in, then they are under the first apron, barely under the first apron, but there's a little bit more flexibility. They would be able to use the full taxpayer mid-level exception of $6.6 million. And so again, this summer of 28-29, yeah, that really comes down to what is Castle's number. If it's a max, then yeah, there's a lot of limitations financially for the Spurs. If it's a little bit less than the max, then there is some more leeway for them to make some moves. Then in 29-30, the final year of De'Aaron Fox's contract extension, max extension, there's two players coming off the books on the cap sheet. That's Devin Vassell and Lou Cornett, both become unrestricted free agents that summer. However, there's two more players where their extensions are kicking in, and those would be the 2025 rookies, Dylan Harper and Carter Bryant. So the year before, if Carter Bryant and Dylan Harper agreed to extensions with the Spurs, then their extensions will kick in this offseason of 29-30. Incoming players this summer in 2029, that draft, the Spurs will be getting they'll have their own first round picks. So again, wherever their pick lands. And then as far as free agency resources, it's really going to depend on what amounts Castle, Harper, and Bryant sign for their extensions, their rookie extensions. So basically, if Harper and Castle are both on maxes, let's just say they sign max extensions, and maybe Bryant's like at $24 million, which would have been his qualifying offer amount, they're going to be over the second apron, which means no access to any kind of exceptions to sign free agents, and more limitations on the kind of trades they can participate in. However, if both Castle and Harper don't come in at max numbers, they sign maybe they don't have max seasons in those first 4 years, and they both end up signing for a little bit less, maybe like $10 million less each. Well, then there's a little bit more flexibility for the Spurs. They barely maybe be under the second apron, but there's definitely going to just be some limitations for them with all these young players coming out on maxes, plus having Wemby and having Fox on maxes as well in that summer of 29-30. So I'd say overall, the first 2 years with Fox are going to be fine. They can still they're going to be not really limited financially, the Spurs, with kind of moves they can make. The third year of Fox's extension does get tricky because of Castle's extension number, and it really depends on the number. And then the fourth year really gets interesting just because of now they have Carter, Bryant, and Dylan Harper's extensions kicking in alongside Wemby and alongside Castle. So again, that's just a quick overview I wrote about over on the spotupshot.com. If you want to see some salary cap projections, just visit that piece over on the spotupshot.com. All right, so now for our third topic, let's talk about the free agent signings the Spurs made this past week. So like I said, normally in August, it's usually a slow month. There's not a lot of news going on, but the Spurs, their front office is just making a bunch of signings this past week. So let's go to Tuesday. The Spurs re-signed Riley Minix to a two-way contract. This was not too surprising because Minix had a qualifying offer to return to the Spurs on a two-way contract. Then on Wednesday, the Spurs announced they re-signed Harrison Ingram also to a two-way contract. Same situation with Ingram, where he had a qualifying offer to return on a two-way contract. But then the more interesting news was that the Spurs added two players to the training camp roster, and that was on Wednesday. They added big man Micah Potter from the Utah Jazz to a training camp contract, to sign him to a training camp contract. And then on Friday, they signed former Oklahoma City Thunder guard Adam Flagler to his training camp contract as well. So with all four of these players on the roster now, let's talk about the state of the roster, where everything stands as of Sunday, August 10th, that I'm recording this. So the Spurs now have 19 players on the roster. They can add up to two more players for training camp and the preseason. However, that the roster needs to be down to no more than 15 players on standard contracts and no more than 3 players on two-way contracts, so 18 players total by opening night, which would be October 21st before opening night. So again, they can still add up to 2 more players here in these next few weeks before training camp begins. So let's just look at a quick breakdown of the roster. They have 13 players now on guaranteed contracts. They have 1 player on a partially guaranteed contract in Lindy Waters III. They have all 3 two-way player spots filled out with David Jones-Garcia, Riley Minix, and Harrison Ingram. And then also, as far as the training camp contracts, they have 2 players, which are Micah Potter and Adam Flagler. So there is still 1 open standard roster spot at 15 spots. So maybe that's a training camp battle right now between Potter and Flagler to see if maybe one of those 2 players can try to earn that spot. So again, there is a vacancy as far as the standard roster goes. So now I did watch some tape on Potter and look at some stats. And so I kind of just want to give a brief scouting report on some of the notes I took on him. So he's a 6'9" floor spacing big, like I mentioned, spent the last 2 seasons with the Utah Jazz. His shot diet, he mainly shoots 43% of his shots come from the corners. where he makes 33% of those looks. 30% come from the arc three, which is where he makes 30%, and then 19% from the rim, where he made 76% of his rim attempts. So he's mainly a 3-point shooter. 73% of his shots come from the rim, from three, should I say. Some of my shooting notes I observed on him. He uses the hop motion when he shoots his shots. He has a quick release for a forward / big. He focuses on getting to the 3-point line and spreading the floor. He fills the corners on the breaks, and then he knows how to pick and pop for threes. As far as his size, he has a size more so of a power forward, but he's able to play some small forward on offense alongside Kessler Edwards with the Jazz and Lauri Markkanen at times. And then he was usually playing the power forward, where a lot of times he was on the floor with like Kessler Edwards, Kyle Filipowski, or Drew Eubanks, who were all occupying the center position. As far as when he drives, some of the notes I took were he struggles in the half court. He can finish better on the break, and then he attacks the offensive glass. As far as his defense, some of the notes I took, here his rebounds mainly come to him, where he's kind of just close to the basket a lot of times. He's being one of the last defenders near the rim. He moves well laterally, mainly guarding threes and fours. He's more of a rotating help blocker when he does block shots. He usually has the kind of blocks where he's kind of like swiping down at the ball when the players are coming up in the gather motion. He's also active as a help defender, and he usually guards. He's not really guarding like the main, offensive options for someone. He's more so guarding the player who's kind of spreading the floor, kind of out on the weak side area of the floor. As far as passing, I noted that he's able to corral some offensive rebounds and kick out to 3-point shooters. And then as far as quality playing time, I did want to note that he actually played in real minutes with the Jazz. So he only played in 38 games this past season with Utah, 18.6 minutes, but 37 of those games were in actual competitive minutes, according to Cleaning the Glass, and he actually started in 10 games. He played 18.4 minutes in competitive games. So again, it was a small sample size of just 38 games, but in the time he was on the floor with Utah, he was playing in a real role, not just being out there in garbage time most of the time. So again, 37 games were competitive games for him. As far as his positions, according to Cleaning the Glass, 57% of his minutes came out the 4 last season with Utah and 43% at the 5. And then as far as the players he guarded, according to Crafted NBA, he mainly guarded 4s, 5s, 3s, and 2s in that order, according to Crafted NBA. So again, that's just a quick scouting report on Micah Potter, the player the Spurs signed to a training camp contract. Now let's talk about Adam Flagler, the other player the Spurs signed to a training camp contract. So he's a 6'3" guard, spent time with the Oklahoma City Thunder in the last 2 seasons. He's also more so of a shooter first. So 66% of his shots came from the arc three last season with the Thunder. Only 22% went in. 9% of his shots came from the corner three. None of his shots went in. And then the mid-range, 10% of his shots came from there, and 50% of his shots came in. But again, it's a very small sample size, and he mainly only played in garbage time for the Thunder when they were up by a lot of points. So when I noticed about his shooting motion, he's more so of a 1-2 shooter when he needs to get his feet set first, and then he has a little bit slower of a gather and release compared to someone like Micah Potter. On defense, again, it's hard to take away. He was mainly guarding guards, but again, he was mainly playing in garbage time a lot of the times. So as far as his quality playing time, it's tough to see more so where he's at, Flagler, in terms of NBA play, because he only played in 37 games with the Thunder, but just 15 of those games were actually competitive minutes in a competitive role. So, basically 60% of his minutes were in garbage time most of the time. So he wasn't getting like meaningful minutes with OKC, which is understandable. They were the team that went on to win the title, and they had a full rotation there in the guard rotation. As far as his position on offense, according to Cleaning the Glass, 74% of his minutes came at the point guard position and 18% at the shooting guard position. And then there wasn't enough minutes to get a matchup for his defensive matchups, according to Crafted NBA, but again, what I saw was mainly based on the eye test. And so what I am interested to see is that if Potter and or Flagler either get waived by the Spurs, there is a chance that when the G League season starts up in Austin in a few months, probably like in late October, early November, then either of those players, the fact that they've been signed to San Antonio, they have a chance to sign with the Austin Spurs. So again, that might be also a reason why the Spurs might have signed these two players in the event that they don't make that final roster spot that the Spurs have open. All right, so for the final topic, let's talk about some schedule news and notes that came out this past week for the upcoming schedule that's going to be released. So the Spurs are going to get another Christmas Day game. According to Shams Charania of ESPN, they are going to be playing in Oklahoma City against the defending champion Thunder on Christmas Day. This will now be 2 of 3 seasons that since Wemby has been on the team that the Spurs are playing on Christmas Day. And of course, I think that's going to become a tradition for the Spurs. As long as they have Wemby on the roster, they're going to be playing in Christmas a lot going forward. And then also for now, The Spurs are projected to open the season in Dallas on October 22nd, according to Mark Stein. Again, he didn't say that for sure. He just said that's kind of where everything stands right now. Which would the marquee matchup there would be putting the top two picks in this past draft, Cooper Flagg and Dylan Harper, on the floor against each other on opening night. And then Stein did want to mention that the full season schedule is expected to be released this coming week, and that is not too surprising considering that the NBA usually puts out the full schedule in mid-August. So we're coming up here on August 15th soon, which is when they released the schedule last season. So again, those are just some quick news and notes on the early games that we've learned about for the Spurs in their schedule release. All right, so that wraps up this episode of the Spotted Pod. Again, we'll kind of see this. We'll see if the Spurs do add 2 more players to the roster, because like I said, they can still do that within these next few weeks before training camp starts up in late September, early October. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode of the Spotted Pod. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a rating on your favorite podcast apps and our YouTube channel. The Spotted Pod is recorded and produced by Paul Garcia. The music for this episode was written by Vincent Garcia and Paul Garcia. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.